Kia ora, this is Left, Right and Centre, and this is a political podcast about where we try to cover a range of different views about the topics of the day. My name's Wayne Parker.
I'm Ben Wiley Van Eerd.
I'm Dallas Surge.
The first question we have of the day is based on Treaty of Waitangi, and so my question for the day is, given the significance of the Treaty of Waitangi in shaping New Zealand's history and ongoing cultural landscape, how can we ensure its effective and inclusive teaching within our school system to promote understanding, reconciliation, and a shared future among all students? How can we ensure its recognition locally and within our local parties?
So do you want to sort of kick us off,
Okay.
Wayne?
I was actually New Zealand's first bilingual trained teacher, and I was amazed at how much or how little in the education system that was based on things Māori or the Treaty of Waitangi. I was very lucky to attend Hutley High School, where I had a social studies teacher named Mr. Williams, and he sort of taught outside the square. And he taught us at that stage, no one else politically interested, about apartheid in South Africa, which was a big eye-opener for me, and he followed through with Te Reti o Waitangi. And that was in the fourth form at school, so that was my first encounter of the treaty and where things happened. Unfortunately, none of my friends at the time at any other school had any teachings of Te Reti o Waitangi, so that was in mid-80s.
Oh, yeah. Maybe we can go around the circle. Maybe how did we get, or how much of Te Tiriti or other things Māori did we get in our education? So I did my schooling primary school, I guess, around mid-90s, and I graduated from high school around the mid-2000s. I definitely learned some things about Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I definitely learned, for example, that there are two different versions. I definitely got that in school, but I actually can't remember anymore where in my schooling I got that. If that was a primary school thing or if that was a secondary school thing. I'm sorry, it's just sort of too long ago for me. There wasn't a lot of Te Ao Māori, I guess I would say, in the schooling that I did get, except for like one class in 7th form, or year 13 for you young ones, where we did... I took a history course that year, and it was totally focused on New Zealand history. But up until that point, there wasn't a lot of Māori things in my education. How about you, Dallas?
Yes, I think about year 7 all the way through to year 10. We always did a Treaty of Waitangi and social studies, but it was always kind of like the basics, you know. In year 13 history, we studied the New Zealand land wars. So, you know, we talked about all the different invasions and everything like that. But a lot of the history was more focused from a European point of view, which was a little disappointing.
Did you? Are there any things that, like, you know, now having passed through the school system, you really wish you had been taught in the school system?
I wish, to be honest, when we were learning about Treaty of Waitangi, we'd gotten a lot more like Māori perspective, or even had a Māori teacher teaching it.
Oh yeah.
Because obviously, you know, some things can be really biased, especially if it affects like you and your culture as well. So like our teacher was European and British, so it was a bit of a spin history is what it felt like. But
Right. Yeah, for me, I definitely got, like I said, a few things about it, but I think where it really fell down for me is, like I mentioned, that year of like New Zealand history. But that year of New Zealand history, it only sort of went up to about, you know, like somewhere in the early 1900s. Like, it was like the early New Zealand history, and there's actually so much of New Zealand history that's happened in the 1900s that it would have been really useful for me to learn about, and that didn't come through for me in school either. How about you, Wayne?
What I've found is, picking up on a point that Dallas said, is that when you have references, which are often books are written by mostly the colonisers, and so you have a sort of mono-ethnic sort of perspective. When I've spoken to historians who are Māori, where a lot of it's oral culture, the story that you get from them is other side of the coin, you know. And when you hear some of the things, for me as a Māori, it saddens me to hear some of the stories which are still being passed on orally, but haven't been put into writing. Yeah, because people want to keep up their oral cultures. And then because it's not put into writing, people say, well, there's nothing to reference that on an academic scale because it hasn't been put into writing. And so you have this cultural conflict which happens between oral history, written history, and because there's more written history from the time, therefore it gives it more validity from a educational perspective. So yeah.
And just in terms of everything that national, or I'd more specifically say David Seymour is trying to do, is a lot of the time I used to debate like American issues back in college.
Okay.
And whenever we're talking about like gun control over there, the biggest thing was it becomes a slippery slope as soon as you start changing the founding document of the country. And I think that's why it's important to leave those founding documents. We can review them, but I don't think we should ever just abolish them or just outright change them to fit someone's own personal narrative. And that's kind of what I feel like David Seymour's doing. It kind of feels a bit like vindictive in a way, just with the way he's going about it.
Yeah, I mean, my view on this is that I think it is weird to there's no the Te Tiriti o Waitangi, in its best light, was an agreement between Māori and the Crown, right? Yeah. And we don't go back and try to unilaterally alter other agreements that we've made, right? It just seems like Te Tiriti is being made a special case. And I think if you ask David Seymour in particular, if there was a private contract between, one body and another body, is it correct for us to take a referendum on whether that should be changed? I think he'd tell you that you were mad. And I don't like the inconsistency that I see from him on this. Like, yes, I understand that the constitution of a country is something that should live and evolve, but I also don't think it's something that should be taken on lightly. And I feel like he's just not respecting the agreement that was made in 1840 when he comes to reassess it today.
Yeah, and I think to a degree, I think a lot of it is ignorance. Because, for example, I can kind of see where he might be coming from when he says he feels like one culture's disadvantaged because another one, is getting more benefits based on the treaty. But at the same time, you need to look at why we give a lot of those benefits, we have a lot more Māori scholarships because oftentimes Māori students don't end up going through to university. We have a lot more programs in place because oftentimes Māori students are the ones disadvantaged. So it's pretty ignorant for us to be, complaining about all these advantages and benefits when oftentimes even still they're disadvantaged with all these programs in place.
One of the words I hear, and it was through the campaign, is Māori privilege. And as a Māori, every time I heard that word, I cringed. Because Māoris have the biggest population in prisons. Māoris have the worst health statistics. We have the highest suicide rate. And when you realise all the bad stats, you have to have a little bit of, well, let's look under that. How does it evolve? And where the Treaty of Waitangi has a lot of problems for Māori is that we signed this agreement, we were happy, no more going to war. But once the agreement was signed, all of a sudden that was weaponised against Māori, and then they took things off us, our language, our culture. They outlawed our language. They had the Tohunga Suppression Act. So that basically says, well, you can't practice your own culture anymore. If you do, you go to jail. And then they started confiscating land. The amount of land confiscated was something like 66 million acres. Now, if you put that into to a monetary term and then tried to pay that back, the government could never pay that back historically. So what happens is they've created a problem historically which they can't resolve. So the best thing to do is dance around and talk about it and point the finger back at Māori and say, well, you're privileged because of it. And Māori are sitting here thinking, but you took that all off us, why didn't you give it back?
Yeah.
The answer is they can't give it back.
Yeah.
And so there's no resolution to give it back. So all they can do is point the finger back at Māori and say you're privileged. And through the campaign, it was so painful. And I heard it on social media 20 times a day. So from a Māori perspective, there were two parties. So Māori and what we call tangata tiriti. So the Crown actually represented tangata tiriti. So that's basically everybody else, And so when they say Māori get special privilege, is it's just not. There's no fact behind it. You know what I mean? A lot of people don't understand the reason they have scholarships, creative scholarships, is because we're so far behind the 8 ball, and the government got so much wealth out of it that they're giving us 2% to compensate for the 50%. And then people are pointing out, so you're getting special treatment. And I found it so frustrating. But looking forward, and it's very interesting to see from the different times we're in school, things have progressed. You know, so from me being at school, being at school at you, things have come a long way. I'm actually glad to hear that you've learned what you've learned in school. That puts a smile on my face. But how do we take that one step further into making sure it's an integral part of our history, where the children learn about our history? I was lucky I had a teacher that knew that I needed this, so he created the curriculum around my need.
Right.
You know, and the class benefited. No one else that year did that. You know, just our class. So we're very fortunate to have that particular teacher. But one of the things, people are moaning about having te reo Māori in the curriculum, and people jump up and down about it. If you can't have the language in there, and the culture and the history the language is part of, then you're stripping actually the history away from it as well. So I just see it's going to be an ongoing problem, and it's going to depend on the government of the time. Because if you have a government that respects things Māori, it becomes part of everything you do. If you have a government that doesn't, they pull the Māori name of ministries out of government. And so where they say, well, Māori names are no longer recognised, you do not have to have them on there. And then we're just starting to roll back into what we had, and no recognition of what needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think it is really interesting to sort of contrast the Luxon administration and how their relationship with Māori is going to, like, even the key governments, like the previous national governments' relationship with Māori is very, very different, I think. I want to pick up on something that you said earlier, Wayne, which was about the, basically the confiscation of Māori land, taonga, culture and things. I think a point of confusion for a lot of, a lot of Pākehā around the country still is that, like, there's sort of two things going on here. One is actually what the treaty says and what that means about how Māori should, relate to tangata tiriti, as you put it. But then there's also the settlements, which is sort of separate to that, right? Yeah. The settlements is that, okay, the Crown clearly breached the treaty, clearly and egregiously breached the treaty. You made that very clear, and I don't think there's actually any debate about that. So some of the things that I think people object to the most, when people are objecting to things Māori, is things which are actually treaty settlements. Yeah. They're thinking, because of the treaty, we have to treat Māori special. No, all of these things come out because the Crown hugely harmed Māori. They can't, as you say, give back what was taken. So they're putting this other thing on the table instead. They're saying, all right, well, what if we give you this? So, like, I definitely think that there's some middle ground somewhere here where, if Pākehā don't like these things which are being offered to Māori through the settlements project, you could always just offer to say, okay, well, less of those things, but more of the actual land or more of the actual, like, financial compensation, right? I don't think that this would be an unreasonable way to go about things. If there are things that, Pākehā are like, no, we can't do that, well, like, all right, well, then show us the money.
The problem went back to the 90s. They created a thing called the fiscal envelope. Okay, and there was one of the craziest things I've ever seen addressing Māori needs and Māori rights. And so what they say is that here's a fiscal envelope, right? Okay, we're going to address the land confiscations. Okay, so all get in line, and there's a $1 billion cap.
Oh yes, right.
And so people are going like, hang on, you've put $1 billion cap on a $3 trillion problem, and you guys fight amongst yourselves. That's the deal. And that was the start of Māoridom saying politically, this is a have. You know what I mean? How do we address this? The government has put this on the table. That doesn't even touch what is our rights. And then there was a big scramble going on. People were thinking, there's only $1 billion. Well, let's get our part. And then that's the first time strategically people says, we can't play into this game. Because if we do, then they'll never be addressed. But the problem is, there's been no resolution after the fact.
Right.
So that was recognised, this is wrong, but what do we do? And that was in 1990, this is 34 years later, and nothing hard has been put on the table to say this is our long-term way to solve this, and then we've been basically in the same thing my entire life.
Yeah, so I wasn't really thinking about that there was sort of like this sort of hard cap that the government set for the settlements process. So in a sense, they had to get really creative about what they were putting on the table that didn't contravene that cap. But as you say, it's a self-imposed cap, and it's not. I don't think you can argue that it has any grounding in natural justice or contract law. So, yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that cap. I think it seems pretty bad.
Yeah. Well, at the time, the good thing about it at the time, Māoridom at the first time, often they think tribally. You know what I mean? So there was no cohesion amongst tribes. But when that was put on the table, that's when they started saying, look, we have to work collectively. We have to work together. And this is how we've been divided, is because we're working from a tribal level, not a pan-tribal level. And one of the things I've noticed over the last election, especially with Te Pāti Māori getting so many of the Māori seats, is that they realised to make a stand, we're only in Māori electorates, so we have to gain the majority of those seats. And I take my hat off to them, they did an extremely good job. And also the candidates which they have in there, they're of a high calibre. So they did what they needed to do to get in there. And I believe that having a very strong Māori voice in there is good. But I've seen nothing from the current government that actually embeds Māori history systemically through school system from now on. And I've just been sitting there thinking, well, basically there's nothing.
Right.
So,
Bella, your thoughts on this, maybe?
Yeah, but just in terms of what you're talking about with embedding Māori history, I think it's real. Like, I'm a big believer in healthy discourse and having a discussion. But I think the way the government's gone about approaching how they want to treat it is just, like I said earlier, it's like vindictive, right? If you go to France or the Netherlands or Italy or Japan, all of their government agencies are in their language, the country's language. So when, Winston Peters and David Seymour says, how is someone from America going to know what wakakatahi means? It's like, well, American people aren't here applying. This is for New Zealand people.
Good point.
And I guarantee you talk to everyone knows what wakakatahi is.
Yeah.
And then, the government picks and chooses based on what they want. I mean, we're still calling it Kaianga Ora, aren't we?
Yep.
We haven't changed the name
true.
back to English. So it's not really going about it in the right way. They're not really wanting to have a discourse about it. And I think that's pretty clear with this government as well, with how they're, going about most things, getting rid of, consultation processes. They're just wanting to steamroll anything that they want to do and not actually think of what's best for the country and the people. Because I guarantee you most of us don't really care about wasting all this taxpayer money on changing names of government agencies that Labour's just going to change back once they get in next time.
One point you brought up there was the use of the Māori language. And one thing which is very unique in New Zealand, we have two treaties, one written in English and one written in the native language. Now, there's this law called the Contra Preferentum, which basically means that if you've got two treaties, right, the treaty written in the native language, that has precedence, because the people who live there obviously weren't fluent in English. And that's why they have that law. New Zealand is the only place where that law is not recognised. And this is what a lot of people don't understand, is when they read out the treaties, well, you have to read out both versions. Of course, Māori speakers didn't speak English, so they only understood one version. And the point of contention is the words they used in the Māori version, and which is governorship, and the words which they used in English, which was sovereignty. And for Māori, a cultural perspective is we cannot own land. Okay, so it's a bit like saying you own your grandparent. No, so your grandparent birthed your parent, your parent birth due. So really, they own you. So from a Māori perspective, that's how we think. Our belief is we come from the land, we return to the land is here before us, the land here is here after us, therefore we can never own the land. So from our perspective, land ownership was something that we could not comprehend, you know. Now, in the Māori version, we say we govern the land. So that means, say, you can use that bit of land over there, I can use that bit of land over there, that's all good, that's our decision. Now, in the English version, it says we cede sovereignty. You see, those two are totally different things. The only word we have for sovereignty is actually mana. Okay, so had they used ceded mana in the Māori version, none of us would have signed it. None of us would have signed it.
That's a really interesting sort of comparison, actually, because I've certainly heard about the. I did learn in school about the differences between Te Tiriti and the treaty, but I really like what you've done there of saying, okay, well, what would a Māori translation have looked like that genuinely did cede sovereignty, and like, you know, you just hear you say it right there and you're like, oh yeah, that's totally different, right?
Yeah.
You can even sort of hear it and understand it, I think, from a limited understanding of Te Ao Māori.
Well, that's why understanding a legal concept is actually based in the perspective from which culture you're looking for. So that's why I try to explain it from a cultural concept, so people can understand. And that's the important that, you know, you can't take the language and the culture separately because they come in one package. Yeah.
Closing thoughts, anyone?
Yeah, well, look, I just think, you know, I love a good discussion, good debate, especially on prominent issues in the country. I just think if we're going to do this, and if we're going to go down this route of, you know, discussing the treaty, what it means, how it affects us and our country and our people, I think we need to go about it in the right way, and I don't think that's what this current government is wanting to do. I think they're just wanting to push their own agenda and not actually think about what the New Zealand people want.
Wayne, this original topic was about, like, education, I think, in a lot of ways, and how do you educate, particularly like in the school system, but I've always thought there's a lot of education to do for adults as well, right? Whenever you try and bring new concepts, especially new cultural concepts through, it's all very well to like bring it through at the school level, but that means that people get left behind. So, and we don't really have much of a, I don't know, an institution or a cultural thing for learning for people who have left school. And, you know, even broader than issues of Te Ao Māori or Te Tiriti, I wonder if there's, you know, that's just something missing a little bit in our society as an education institution designed for adults.
I think you're right. As part of my income, I do Māori consultancy, and I try to limit that, but the amount of requests I get for it, just for that, I could have a full-time job doing that alone. And that's because there's not enough of us out there with the proper qualifications and experience to get into the places. And usually we've got such a high rate that only, you know, big corporates can afford us, and where the schools are where it's really needed. And also what you'll find is if a parent doesn't know about something, a child will go home and say, Mum, what's this thing about the treaty? And then Mum and Dad doesn't know, then they've got no support at home. Yeah. So one of the things learning at this time, it's not just the individual, it's like a family level as well. Yeah, my final words.
Cool.
This was another episode of Left, Right and Centre. Hopefully we'll see you again.